of here. Welcome back to Appalachian Expose. Next to me, guy obviously needs no introduction. One half the Fantastics, Bobby Fulton, and someone I've had a pretty prolonged history with.
Right.
What we do here, Bobby, and I think Moose told you earlier, is these are the conversations we've had a million times in the cars.
Right.
Just letting the fans see inside that, behind the curtain, inside the car, inside the dressing room, those conversations. So let's get way back to the beginning of this area, because it's always fascinating to me, because there's 10 million stories, but all lead to the same place.
Right.
What was it? Well, first of all, how old were you when you first started watching wrestling?
I was about 6 years old.
Yeah.
In Chillicothe, Ohio. I watched Columbus, Ohio television station. We only had 3. And it was the Detroit wrestling, the big time wrestling with the Sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Curry, Flying Fred Curry, Bobo Brazil, all those guys. Back then there was territories and stuff. So the Detroit territory worked the Ohio area. And I started watching it when I was about 6 years old on TV. What happened, Shane? I walked by the TV one day and it happened to be on. Yeah. And I stopped in my tracks. And back then they had the studio wrestling, right?
Oh, yeah.
So Bob Finney was going, and now he has him in a side headlock. And I could hear the ring making noise, stomp, stomp. I could hear the guys hitting each other in the little roar of the studio crowd. Yeah. And the guy commentating sounded like the greatest symphony I'd ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
And I was hooked from there, and I wanted to be home every Saturday when the wrestling was on. I started buying the magazines and stuff at the drugstore.
Had you read comic books before?
I never read comic books. I wasn't into comic books. I'm gonna be quite honest with you. I am this whole time with you. I learned geography through my wrestling magazines. I could tell by looking at the magazine where the matches was.
Yeah.
The Boston Jordan had a certain look and had a step with the rail going up it. Madison Square Garden back then had 4 ropes. And I could just, Amarillo, and then I could tell Modesto, California, because you could always see the studs. I'm going to say studs, but it's not one of them. Raptors, you can see that. So I could tell by the magazines. Plus, I also, like I said, learned to spell, Tex McKenzie, epitome. I went to school, and when I went to school, I'd be in study hall. My brothers see me over there going like this, right? And what I was doing was wrestling.
Wow.
I was wrestling.
Mimicking what you'd seen on TV?
Yes, and I was wrestling. We didn't have the little wrestlers back then.
Right.
But I'd get a cigar box, put 4 nails in it, wrap yarn around it, and I had little apes and little men, and I'd be in there wrestling.
Yeah.
And what I started doing at about 7, I started writing up cards. Like I'd draw them out, and I'd write wrestling, Columbus, Ohio, and make the matches and this and that, and started designing, ads. This old farmer used to come to the house all the time, and my real name's Jimmy, and said, "Oh, I do see Jimmy sitting at that table writing." Well, I was drawing up, wrestling cards, dreaming.
Yeah.
Like I had Bobo Brazil and this and that one and different people. And plus, back then we didn't have the internet. So that magazine helped me to learn about Charlotte wrestling, Florida wrestling, Eddie Graham and them, and all the different territories. It's funny. And I know I'm jumping ahead, but I was about 13 years old, and there was a guy that had a wrestling company in my town. And what the deal was, from the 1920s to 1965, Al Haft was one of the original founding fathers of the National Wrestling Alliance, was a big power broker.
Yeah.
He ran Columbus and had his hands in different territories. So up until 65, he owned it. And Hank Best, I started setting the ring up for him because he stayed in business. What happened was, Al Haft had never paid taxes. From 1920 to 1965. He owned all kinds of business. He was even in charge of one of the banks in Ohio. This guy, he was a wrestling coach at Ohio State.
Yeah.
So what happened was, you can read this on the internet. The IRS went to him and said, Al, you either stop the wrestling today or you're going to prison. He never paid taxes.
Never paid it on. Incredible.
From 1920 to 1965, he had Columbus, Ohio. He had Cincinnati. He booked all the towns around, right? Plus, Lord Blair's told me he worked for him in 1949. Lord Blair's, guess how much he made a week there? $1,400 a week in 1949.
49?
49.
Holy
He
crap.
averaged 14.
What-
Ronnie Garvin told me that there was such a waiting line to get in there because of money.
Yeah.
And you know, I kept wondering, that's BS.
Yeah.
1,400. But here's the deal. Buddy Rogers was in the territory.
Mhm.
Handsome Johnny Barron, Ernie Roth was a manager, Magnificent Maurice, a lot of guys. But they would have 3 matches on the show. And they would be doing 3-4 matches on a lot of shows.
Yeah.
Well, they had 3,000 people. They were paying $1 a piece, so that's a $3,000 house.
Yeah.
So if we go by what the promoters said, they divided into thirds. Then the boys would get the split. If it was $1,000, 6 guys. I mean, it's obvious.
Yeah.
You could make $1,400 a week,
Sure.
working 5-6 nights a week, which they did.
Especially not paying taxes.
Yeah, well, yeah, especially not paying taxes. But he ran a lot of the places, and what was so funny about him was he had a motel, he had Alhath, he had, and a guy I seen this couple years ago. He said, "I keep trying to think of that guy that was at the hotel swimming pool all the time, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And it was Buddy Rogers.
Is that right?
And I'll tell you this, Al Haft had a gym downtown Columbus, up on the 2nd story, and they had great big windows there. I've shot pictures of the building. And Buddy Rogers in the wintertime would lay up in the window to sundown. And one day a young guy came in about 15, 16 years old, named Ray Stevens. 16 years old.
Yeah. Wow.
My dad went to school with Ray Stevens 1 year. And they said Buddy Rogers was laying in that window and he never got up. But this was a 16-year-old Ray Stevens. They said when he got in the ring in that gym, Buddy Rogers came up out of that window and watched him in amazement.
Yeah.
He was that great
I'll bet, yeah.
at 16 years old. But what happened with Buddy overstayed his welcome there. And Al was trying to get him out of the territory, but Buddy would have a stronghold because he brought his crew in
Yeah.
and hold Al up. Well, Al finally had Carl Gotch and Dr. Big Bill Miller.
I remember Miller, yeah. Well, I remember Gosh too, but I remember.
Yeah, Dr. Big Bill Miller blocked the dressing room door and Carl Gotch went in and broke Buddy's arm. But Giant Baba was on the show that night. My Hank Vest was on the show, which you may have met his son who wrestled. They've been at my show. I'll introduce you to them sometime in Charlie's office. But they were on the show and they broke Buddy Rogers' arm in this thing here. And it ended up being a big thing. He went to the police and pressed charges, and it was a bad thing, but it was I always had wondered for years, and I asked them guys, why did they do that? Why did Al have to allow that? They said, no, Al asked them to do that. Bill Miller was one of Al's guys in college, wrestler. He broke him in. George Bullis, who was the original Zebra Kid, and all these guys in. And like I said, he ran from 1920 to 1965. When he started wrestling, he told himself the young Gotch. But then he got so old. I'll tell you what, you've heard of Strangler Lewis, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Al took care of him for years and had him there in the territory. And like I said, he had such a stronghold. But that's how I started setting the ring up. Hank Vest continued to run after they shut down in 65. And Al's son ran for about 2 years, but then I started setting the ring up at 13. And Shane, it's nothing like today. Even the guys that walked into the building, they walked in wearing real nice clothes, nice suitcases.
Yeah.
They didn't talk among nobody. We set the ring up and we would try to hurry up so I could roll around the ring a little bit.
Yeah.
We weren't allowed in the dressing room.
Mhm.
They never spoke out of school to us.
Right.
They were businessmen all the way.
Sure.
Even they were taught that.
Yeah.
And they respected the business that way.
Sure.
You know, we weren't allowed to talk out of school.
Right.
Very looked down upon. You know, and even if someone did say, well, I'm smart, I'm this, I'm that, you're what? Well, I'm glad you are, I'm not.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. I remember those times.
And we had so many conversations. But them guys took care of that business. And I'll never forget, they really didn't want me in it. They liked me, but they didn't want me in it. So what ended up happening was, I ended up writing a letter to a guy and getting on a show in West Virginia. And I was just telling the other day, I called Hank Best. And I said, Hank, I got a match. He said, Jimmy. But one time I was riding it, and I'm going, Hank, I want to be a wrestler. He said, I've got an idea for you. I said, you do? I'm up there going like this. He said, why don't you get your brown outfit and put a little spot of yellow on it and call yourself the Wrestling Turd. And I just thought, Hank, but I told Hank, and I still have the Coral and Hillsborough original catalog that I had, was a little catalog, you've seen them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 1977, and I said, Jimmy Hines wouldn't give you a dime in Chinese money. I wrote Bobby Fulton on that thing and signed my first autograph and had my first match in Clarksburg, drove 350 miles, West Virginia.
Yep.
I got paid $5 whole. It was the happiest day of my life.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, it's funny when I hear you saying, because there were so many things that popped out as you were saying it, bringing back memories.
Right.
6 years old was the exact same time
Right.
I started watching studio wrestling in
Right,
Pittsburgh.
right.
Didn't really know what I was looking at,
Right.
and I remember roller derby coming on
Yes,
right before.
yes.
Well, my brothers and sisters, if I was 6, my brother was 16.
Right.
So never wanted me pounding around with him, right?
Right.
I was a little kid. But we would sit there and watch it because Batman was on right around that same time.
Yeah.
I always had a towel with a safety
Yes,
pin, right?
that's true, yeah.
And by the end of the show, I'd end up getting excited watching, and I'd jump off the couch on my brothers and sisters, and they'd get sent to my bedroom.
Right,
And so I saw a lot of studio wrestling. I never saw the end of the studio wrestling show because I was always in my bedroom.
Wow, in trouble.
And then I stopped watching till I was about 13.
Really?
My dad got cable. Like you, I'm reading wrestling magazines
Right.
about Harley Race,
Right.
Ric Flair,
Right.
Don Kernodle, and
Right.
Murdoch, or Sarge. But I couldn't see them.
Right.
And so I'd stare at those pictures and wonder and look at it. And when I was 13, my dad got cable, came into Pittsburgh for the first time. And strangely enough, on the day he had the cable put in, Dad worked on the railroad, so he was always gone.
Right.
Even when he was supposed to be home for 3 days, without fail, tonight at midnight, the phone would ring.
Right.
Called dog catching. So my memory of being at my dad's house would be with spending it with my stepmother because he was always gone. Well, when they put the box in, they gave Dad a free TV guide.
Right.
So he's looking through the TV guide and he said, "Hey, wrestling's on tonight at midnight. You want to watch it?" I had zero idea that my dad even liked wrestling. After he died, I found out he lettered 4 times in high school.
Wow! You didn't know that before?
I didn't know my dad graduated, let alone he'd wrestled.
Wow!
None of that. And so at midnight, it's still like one of those fondest memories of my dad. He was laying on the couch, and I was sitting on the floor, leaning against the couch.
Right.
And the WOR show comes
Yes,
on,
yes.
that I had never seen. So it was a studio show, and the very first segment was Superstar Billy Graham with Graham Wizard, Bernie, and standing behind a cage, talking about this upcoming match with Bruno. And at the end, he takes a head of cabbage and starts grating on there.
Yeah.
I was like this.
Wow. Captivated.
He's going to kill Bruno.
Yeah.
And I was so sucked in.
Yeah.
And then I realized that the next day at 6:05, looking at the TV guide,
Atlanta was on.
Atlanta was on. And I turned it on, didn't know who was on.
So what year would that have been?
76, maybe 7. I'm thinking 6 though. And I turn it on, and there's Harley Race.
Right.
And there's these guys I've been reading about.
Right.
And not instantly, but very shortly after, I started segueing. Not that I didn't like WWF anymore, but my attention was being pulled to the NWA.
With that style of wrestling.
Yes.
Totally 2 different styles.
Yes, complete. And like you, instead of like the stuff like this, you talk about making as a
Right.
kid. My friends and I, completely out of whim, we all watched wrestling, all talked about it, goofed around with it. And we had looked in one of the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines, and there was a kid that got his picture in the magazine because he had built this crappy homemade ring,
Right.
carpeting,
Right,
and vines
right, right.
for ropes and stuff. We were all pretty handy and said, we can make a better ring than
Really?
that. So we went up to the junkyard and stole, a bunch of this on the side of a tanker,
Right.
a great big, turnout was titanium pipe.
Wow.
It was worth a shitload of
Right,
money.
right.
And cleaned it all up, and we built this ring. And then after a week or so, we're bored. Like, what are we going to do now?
Right.
Well, remember back then, Jerry Lewis used to do the telephone.
Yes.
And tell you, hey, kids, have a backyard
Right.
carnival, raise $5, $10
Right.
and send it in. So I came up with the idea, let's have a backyard wrestling show.
Wow.
It has to be the world's first backyard
That's what I was going to
wrestling.
say, the original.
It's
Started the
1978.
trend.
Yeah. And somehow, well, the lady, her name's Angeline Paparella. She was in her 50s, 60s, had been a nurse, and when she was 39, she had contracted this adult onset muscular
Right.
dystrophy. Completely immobile. She had moved a couple fingers, about like that.
Wow.
And it didn't strike me at the time, too young. But as time went on, I thought to myself, how courageously and diligently that woman fought that disease.
Right.
It was awe-inspiring.
Yes.
She could move a few fingers, and she's calling me all the time, going, hey, there's a wrestler that lives in the area, right?
Right.
And I'm going, really? She said, he's an Italian guy. I said, Bruno Sammartino. She
Wow.
said, no, it's not Bruno. And then she fumbled with the name. She said, it's like Dominini. I said, Dominic Garucci? She goes, yeah, he lives 6 miles from me.
Wow.
Who knew?
Right. Right.
So we get the address and go out there. And he was on the road. His wife, Janine, came to the door and said he's not sure if he's going to be in town that day, but if he is, he might show up.
Really?
So we were afraid to advertise him that he wouldn't show.
Right.
And we start the show, first matches in the ring. As kids, what we did was we wrote the matches out
Right.
and practiced them. And this white LTD pulls in behind the business next door. The door opens and it looked like a barrel getting out.
Right.
Just this massive human
Oh,
being.
yeah,
Right down his calves were like
yeah.
this on the sides. And he had shorts and a t-shirt on. And he came and he was so taken by what he saw. We were doing a pretty good
Right.
job that he actually got involved in one of the matches.
Really?
Came down to ringside. Well, we were.
Oh, yeah. Dominic, the new TV star.
Yeah. The tag champ at that
Yeah,
time with Dino
yeah,
Bravo. So
yeah.
afterwards, my brother-in-law had been taking pictures from like up on top of buildings and stuff. Had all these amazing pictures. After the show was over, he pulled all of us out front of my friend's dad's business and said, let's get a group picture. So Dominic's standing there, and someone standing on the wall behind us and stuff, and I'm right next to Dominic.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes, how old are you punks anyway? I said, I'm 14, I'm in 8th grade. They're all 13 and 7th grade.
Right.
I said, how old are you? And typical Dominic, he said, never ask a wrestler's age, you fucking punk. And then he told me he was 48 that
Right,
day. So I'm
right.
guessing he was probably lying then too.
Right.
But he and I struck up a friendship, and with you making the
Yes.
stuff and doing these things, in a very similar way, we did the same thing.
Right.
And it sucked us to the business.
Yes.
What was the impetus? So you told me you showed up at this building. Any formal training prior to that?
Well, like I said, I got in the ring before the show, before people would get in and we would roll around. I didn't know what wrestling was, but I had kind of an idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I also had, Mom and Dad had bought this land and had a log cabin on it. It was 200 years old, and the floor gave a little bit. So I took a piece of carpet, laid down in there, and took a clothesline and put it across, just had one side rope.
Sure.
And me and this guy would get in there and flip around and go, because when you're young, you can take it.
Yeah.
And this and that. But my first match, Shane, oddly enough, when I got there, on the way there, I told Dad, because I used to like to fight when I was young.
Sure.
I just like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I told my dad, I said, if this stuff's not real, I'm not staying in it. He said, boy, if it's not real, it's more reason to stay in it. You won't get hurt as much again. So I said, well.
And Dad wisdom again.
Right. Well, when I got down there, right, I was only 16 years old. And I don't know if you ever met this guy, Chief Don Red Cloud. He was from Akron, Burlington, Ohio. He's a Herman Watson. He had a ring too.
Yeah.
But he wrestled as an Indian.
Yeah. The name sounds real familiar. I bet I have.
And a lot of the Pittsburgh underneath guys that wrestled on the studio that would get beat was on this show. I was on first. Except for one guy. Well, they had a 10-man battle royal advertised. There's only 9 wrestlers. So I got the chance to go and wrestle. So I went back there. I wrestled a guy named Joseph Shedlock who wrestled that night as Mad Dog Mike. Well, we were the second match. And I don't know what the finish was supposed to be, but about 4 minutes in the match, the dressing room emptied. And they come out and they pull us apart. They thought we was going to kill each other. I was burnt. I was mat burned, rope burned, from head to toe. And I got paid $5 whole.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, this is great. And I said, can I wrestle again next month? That was June. And I went back July. In August, I went back. And there was a young guy coming back from Pittsburgh TV.
The studio show.
No, he was coming back from WWE. Reading. He was coming back from Hamburg and Allentown TV.
Mm-hmm.
He had his knee all messed up. His name was Mert Shire. And Mert Shire later became Rip Rogers. And he had went and did jobs because back then they would bring guys in to do jobs, which I did that myself later on the WWF TV.
Sure.
So I met him for the first time there, and I got some experience there. And then I started. What happened was Flying Free Fury, who I grew up as a kid, was running. Him and Bob O'Fury. Well, I went to a show one night. They were running, and my friend went back, and I was a big bulky guy, and my friend and I was wrestling a little bit, and my friend said he asked my friend, should you referee tonight? And when I walked in that dressing room, I'd seen underneath guys, but I never. I mean, when I walked in this room, it was in Circleville at the Fairgrounds Coliseum where you wrestled me many times, and I walked in. And the shower steam was going. And there was Dr. Jerry Graham smoking a pipe, while Boo Fury smoking a cigar. And man, my eyes probably got about this big. And they said, well, should you referee tonight? I said, I can do anything you want me to do. And I went out and refereed the show. And then Fred said, could you wrestle for me in Lima, Ohio next week? And I wrestled for him as a babyface. But then he said, hey, can you go ride with me to Kentucky? I've got a match down there. I'd like to take you down there and wrestle you. So I started being his traveling opponent. And I gained a lot of experience because Fred had wrestled on top in San Francisco, Hawaii, Ohio, Texas. And I was just 17 years old wrestling. And wrestling Bob O'Fury, who had the big eyebrows and cauliflower ears, hair up. I mean, but he had hands that was like hams. Yeah. He was only about 190.
Is that right?
About my height.
Yeah.
But he had hands that were like hams. Which he had fathered them in an exhibition match with Jack Dempsey in Detroit. And Wild Bill Fury, this was 78, right? Wild Bill Fury was wrestling in the 30s.
30s?
Yeah.
How old was he then?
He was, well, when I met him, okay, so I'd been 78. He started wrestling in the 40s because he was about 60-some years old when I met him. I remember, back then you shouldn't be a fan of the dressing room.
Yeah.
I brought my little Rim, my little Kodak, and it had the little thing on it with the little thing that spun on it. I said, Bo, can I take your picture? Looking like this at me, like, damn, man. We have a mark in the dressing room, which now happens all the time. But you get in the dressing room before you put your stuff down. Can I get a picture? Can I get a picture? Can you sign my autograph?
Yeah.
I even had one guy steal my tux at an independent show, an outlaw show, that I wrestled that night. I got back dressed and I said, where's my tux at? I'd saved 2 for my boys, right?
Yeah.
It's gone. Well, I wondered where it was. And finally I found out a guy had stolen it. And I told him, I said, you stole my jacket. And he said, well, it's shown my house got repossessed and they took my trailer and your jacket. And I said, are you kidding me? Because one night he was on the internet arguing with his daughter and wife, right? I said, I got on there and said, well, why don't you just sue yourself?
It was there.
And it was him.
Yeah.
And I said, you stole my jacket, man. I sent him the pictures of it. He had posted the pictures up like a Hall of Fame in the room he had in his trailer. And there my jacket was. But he got repossessed. So later on he paid me for it.
Yeah.
And everything. But I mean, just nowadays, like I said, Bob Jury's mad because I'm taking pictures.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have dared to ask a lot of them. I didn't even tell Harley Race up until I seen him in Charlotte. Man, I really enjoyed your wrestling.
Oh.
I loved watching your matches. It was poetry in motion.
Yes, it was.
For him and so many of them.
Sure.
You know. And we couldn't tell him, Shane, when we were young. Man, I love your wrestling. They said, a Mark's in the dressing room. You know.
Mick and I, he was about 6 months behind me fully.
Right.
Dominic would always put us on first.
Right.
The curtain jerk, right? Quick little match. He knew what I could do. I knew what he could do. So we were always done pretty early. And, you know, learning like that, how Mick Foley and I, 2 fairly big names in our business, learned what kayfabe meant. This is how we were taught. I had never heard that term at any time in Dominic's school. And this is one of the earliest times we're put on a show. And Mick and I are near the doorway to the match is to start in a few minutes. And we're talking. And somebody yells out, kayfabe. And I'm not making a joke. I honestly thought somebody was yelling for a woman named kayfabe.
Yeah.
A few minutes later, kayfabe, goddammit. You know, and I remember thinking in my head, like, I don't know this. You look around, like, I don't see a lady in here, but whoever, they're getting hot.
Right. The boys.
So Dominic. Now at that show, Bruno and David were there.
Wow.
The Samoans, Afi Sika, the Valiant brothers were there. You know, a bunch of people like that.
Yeah.
So
big name guys.
Yeah, I know what Dominic's thinking. They all know these are my young boys. And we're not kayfabe.
Taking care of the business.
So he comes over. Remember how Dominic was back then? Big Italian paws, just a big human being.
Right.
And I'm 205 at the time.
Right.
And Dominic comes over and smacks us both.
Right.
Hand back here, smack upside the head, and grabs us by the ear and pulls us into the shower. Mick and I have no idea why we're getting beaten. You know, what did we do wrong?
Right.
And he's mad because I'm sure all of his friends are over here watching his young boys be disrespectful
to the business.
Yes, and he yells out. He goes, "You didn't hear fucking a kayfabe?" And I said, "Dominic, I don't know this woman, right?" And he raises his hand, and I covered up again. I said, "Why do you keep on hitting me?"
Yeah. And
he said, he looked at Mick and he looked at me and thought for a second. He goes, "You don't know? You 2 fucking superstars don't know what kayfabe means?" And me and Mick looked at each other like,
"You don't know."
And it must have popped in his head that I hadn't taught them yet.
Yeah. Because
he real sheepishly went, "They take the fuck away from your opponent."
Yeah.
And he walked away.
Right.
But that's how Mick Fulton and I learned what kayfabe.
Right. We, you know, I don't want to shut you off. I'm going to keep you going, but if you go to a wrestling store and the first thing they pull out is a sheet of paper with the vocabulary, you know you're in trouble.
Right.
Because that was the last thing we learned.
Yes. Yeah.
We learned to get in the ring and produce.
Yeah.
Then we learned.
Produce or else.
Yes.
Or else.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then we learned about the kayfabe and the different languages and later on Carney and this and that. But that wasn't on the forefront.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I said, of course with Dominic you had a good end. I mean, top hand, this and that, worked on top everywhere. But for me, well, Fred Curry and Bo Curry helped me tremendously. But for some guys, we're not wanted in the business as young.
Right.
Because the older guys seen us as they're coming our way.
We're marks.
And not just that, but they're going to take my place one day.
Yeah. Plus, I think, like, you and I are not the biggest guys in the world, right? We're not the 9 foot tallest.
No.
In those dressing rooms back then, for the longest time, these were literally giant men.
Yeah, I know they were
Huge.
yes.
And, you know, the guy was telling people, like, then good-looking white meat kids, that you don't need in the business. We need that guy with wart hair and guy that's big and strong. And, you know, luckily that started changing. But, and this is the part of these interviews that always strike me. I've interviewed everybody we know, right? All 12 names, friends. And the story juts out a little bit here, a little bit there, but it's like behind the music, right? These band members get together, work their butts off, get over, make great music, then they fight each other and they break up.
That's right.
Right?
That happens.
And the same thing in our business, we all have these slightly different stories, but very similar stories in coming into it. So, like, I can't imagine, like, going to a building to be booked on a show with guys like Wild Bill Curry, Fred Curry, all these guys, and not having had formal training.
No,
because
never.
Like, even with the formal training, those first 6 months, hell, actually 6 years in the business, is stressful as hell.
Right.
I knew, like I always tell people, at a school, anybody, especially a good wrestling academy, you know how to do a body slam and an arm drag and a hip toss. You're taught all those. You just don't know when to do them, when not to do them. And so, like, I can't even imagine going into an arena to work, regardless of who I'm working with, and not have had any formal training.
I had none. I had none. There was no wrestling school.
Yeah.
Everybody was protective about the business.
Sure. Yeah.
I was on the job learning. I'll never forget this. I'll never forget. When I first started, I was wrestling the main events in 17 because I just had a look about me, and they called me Crazy Bobby Fulton.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was I was wrestling, I was traveling free, I'd wear a mask a lot of times. I'd sell us pictures, right? And then go back and wear a mask and wrestle.
Yeah.
Well, I got in the dressing room one night and I looked around, everybody in the place had a mask on. I said, this is BS, man. So I took my mask off the hook. I told Fred, I said, I'm going to do a little bit of the sheep, the original sheep. I'm going to do a little bit of your dad. And I'm going to be Crazy Bobby Fulton. And it's Georgetown, Kentucky. I started wrestling every Sunday night. And he said, yeah, that's good. So what happened was I lost my train of thought now. What was you talking about? Oh, about formal training.
Yeah.
So I started in the main events, was more punch, kick, slam. I'd take slams and this and that, and just learning on the job.
Sure.
But it wasn't until I got down to Tennessee and wrestled for Nick Willis. Me and Eric Embry went there and wrestled there, and I was wrestling one of the Gibson brothers one night. And he says, all right, shoot me off, give me a tackle. I went, who goes down? I swear.
I believe it. That's why I'm wondering, like, with no formal training,
I had none.
You couldn't even communicate the language. Take a bump.
I'd take a bump. I'd wrestle.
But did you know it was called a bump?
Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah.
I knew that. I knew about bumps. I knew about selling. But I even went before this and went to WWF and wrestled in Hamburg and Allentown and stayed in Region. I was even on the program of a match with Fred Jordan, Chester Flying Fred Drury, on one of the matches. So she got me booked up there. And then after I went the first time, Brother Monsoon was home my house in Ohio. My mom would answer it. He said, yeah, I want to speak to Bobby. I'd answer it, Brother Monsoon. Can you come do TV and bring a couple guys with you? Sure. And I'd go up there and do the TV before stand. You didn't have to know nothing.
Right.
It was bang, bang, boom, boom, boom. This. But if you could do a little bit, they would have you work a bunch of TVs.
Sure, yeah.
So one time I remember I'd worked 2 or 3 times already. And then he came back to get me again to wrestle Nikolai Volkov, and he was big. But I took my stuff off, and so they got my friend that hadn't wrestled. They put him in there, so he wrestled. But I never really until I got to Tennessee did I understand the high spots, which actually I don't know if you know this or not, but they weren't really developed. Buddy Rogers is the one that brought them into wrestling. You know that, right?
No, I didn't.
It was called sequences. There wasn't called a high spot. Up until Buddy Rogers, it was just wrestling.
Right. I remember.
Buddy Rogers started the sequences. And that's what he told them. A sequence.
Where did he pick it up?
He made it up.
Wow.
Well, see, if you watch the old matches, in Mexico they used to give the tackles like that and drive them up.
Yeah.
Well, that's how Buddy and them started and did them. Buddy was the originator. There was never a high spot in wrestling before Buddy. That's why he really changed wrestling.
Yeah.
He brought the sequences in, the tackles, the drop down, this and that. So, and I hadn't seen that with the Sheik. I mean, the Sheik's not doing.
Right.
And his territory was a lot of older guys, except for Chris Fulton and them. So, but I'd never seen high spots.
Right.
I never thought I did. I didn't know.
Yeah.
But I learned about them. Then we'd go down the road as we drove. All right, Bobby. One tackle drop down, hip toss, shift off, arm drag. Okay, and then I started learning.
Yeah.
I went to cavalry. I was a heel all this time up until I got my arm broken in a riot. But I wrestled for Stu Hart and him.
Yeah.
And it was a great learning experience.
I bet.
Guys from all
Ever
over
go to the dungeon?
I never went. I was outside the place. I wouldn't go in the house. He had all kinds of Cadillacs broke down around outside.
Yeah.
And I'd sit there and I'd go, what's all them cars sitting there? Said, well, Stu can't store them. So he just punched the windshield, busted out, and goes and just in another car to start and leaves and goes, you know.
So, like with that whole, the factory or the what do they call it? The dungeon.
Dungeon.
So when I'm up there one time with Brett and I think maybe Owen, they take me down there. What I noticed was the ceiling. But like I don't want to get out of frame here, but the ceiling was like right here. I'm 6 foot tall, so mats, all flat mats, right? And then you hear the tapes. And at first I thought it was a work, the curdling screens and stuff, and that's I don't remember Stu or not, but he.
I remember Stu River. He used to come up and he'd go, let me looking pretty good. Let me show you this whole. And you start moving then.
Yeah.
And then I'll tell you 2 stories when I was there.
Yeah.
This newspaper guy went to Stu Hart and said, we think wrestling is fake. So Stu said, I want you to come down to the dungeon and I'll show you a little bit. And all of a sudden, they take him down. And I heard this from Dynamite Kid.
Yeah.
Dynamite Kid, I seen wrestling cavalry in 1980. The most phenomenal guy I've ever seen in the ring.
Yes.
But so Stu and them have the guy doing, here's what they'd do. They'd have him worked out, right? And then Stu and them would be up standing talking, and the guy would drop the weight down over his throat because he was tired. And Stu and Dynamite would be, hey, well, let me tell you, Dynamite and shit. And the guy'd be down there, oh! They pulled off on him. Well, he's blown up, right?
Yeah.
Now Stu says, all right, you bastard, I'm going to show you a little thing here. I'm 60-some years old. My young guys, I'm not going to let them do it because they really hurt you. And let me just show you. And all of a sudden he'd hook him. Well, I read the newspaper article. He broke the guy's arm. He broke his arm. But the story I liked was about Mongolian Stomper. Archie Jody, he broke in there. He was a pretty big guy.
Yeah, I remember that.
2 stories I heard from Archie Jody. He was driving the ring truck, right? And Stu was asleep, and they were pulling the trailer behind him. Well, Stu's asleep in the car, and all of a sudden he wakes up, and he looks out the rearview mirror, and he asks Archie, where's the ring in the trailer?
It's gone.
Archie said, I don't know, it's back there, ain't it? Somehow they lost the trailer in the ring, and Archie just kept driving for miles and miles. Well, Stu had stretched him for so long.
Yeah.
And one day, he had Archie hooked down in the dungeon. And Archie looked up at him. And Stu had him, and Stu's tongue was hanging out.
Yeah.
Fight! And his tongue's hanging out to here. And Archie had enough strength. Boom! To punch Stu. About to cut his tongue off, blood's dripping down. And see, if anybody ever got advantage of Stu, here's what he would say. I think I hear Helen telling me.
Yeah.
He's out. But the boys told me when they were young, Smith and all of them, Wayne, I knew all the boys.
Yeah.
Brett, Bruce, Keith, that Stu would take them down in the dungeon and make them run around naked. And they'd be running around, he'd have a medicine ball.
Yeah.
And he would throw it. And when you got knocked down, it's your time to take a shower. And they would run around up there.
Wow, that's great.
They told me that there were 3 stories to the house, which it was.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Helen would mostly stay up on the 3rd floor.
Yeah.
But I mean, imagine how life was there with Stu. I mean, hey, we would be doing TV, right? And here would be Stu, the great big promoter, and somebody throw, you know how like during interviews at Hills they throw popcorn?
Yeah.
All of a sudden in the corner of the screen, you see Stu hurt, they'd throw popcorn in, it land on the ring, Stu would be over there eating the popcorn right off the mat. And we'd go into like Edmonton and all these towns, and Stu would come out with a trash bag full of toilet paper. He's still out of the arenas. I mean, just crazy stuff. But I loved working there, and I loved all the guys, and I tell Brad every time I see him, I really enjoyed it. He said, Bobby, you're one of the few people that can say they enjoyed working in Calgary, but it was a learning experience.
Oh, sure.
One time, Stu, I was living up there. One time, Stu Hurt told me. And the problem was, if Stu told you, you don't know if it was him or not.
Right.
So it's the boys.
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
Yeah, everybody does the imitation.
Yeah, and his sons do them real good. They would have people drive all the way to Calgary from Florida.
Oh, shit.
And they'd show up on Friday night to wrestle.
Yeah.
And Stu said, well, who are you? I never heard of you. Well, we talked to you on the phone. It's one of his boys, right?
Yeah.
So Stu told me one time, and I was up there, and hey, you bastard, you're really coming along. And I'm thinking, is this him?
Yeah.
Or is this not? Yeah. I said, well, Stu, if you think I'm coming along pretty good, can I get a raise? Right?
Yeah.
And I got a raise. So I must have been talking to the real Stu. That was my temperature chaser there.
Sure.
Like, well, hey, you think you're going to pull this on me? And I won my first major title up there. I was at my house, living in a house we stayed in, and Lynn Denton and David Patterson, Fidel Sierra, and Lynn Denton, the grappler, was the tag team champions. And they knocked at the door about 7 o'clock in the morning and said, hey, man, small package me. And I said, what? I hooked them and small packaged them. 1, 2, 3, they threw the tag team belts to me and said, you're the new North American tag team champion. I'm a young guy right in the business, 18 years old, but what am I going to do with these belts?
Yeah.
So about 2 hours later, Dynamite Kid comes. Bobby, I believe you have a small package for me. They had already had the rib, set up, small package. But I loved that territory and all the guys that was in it. It was a lot of fun there.
I got very fortunate. First of all, I heard, in the wrestling magazines.
Right.
When I'm breaking in, and I'm down in UWF, I'm seeing my name in the magazines. There. Rookie of the Year.
Right.
Shane Douglas #3, Steve Cox, Brian Pillman, or Chris Benoit.
Right.
And I never saw who these guys were.
Right.
They were always
in different territory.
And finally, when I would later meet them, I put the face to the names, and Owen and I became quite close. And when they had the funeral up there, just the whole thing being so surreal. When I first heard it, I was in my house, and my buddy called me and said, "Hey, are you here? I'm watching the pay-per-view. They're doing an angle where they're saying Owen Hart died," and I'm thinking, "What a stupid angle! Why would they do that?" So I go and get online, and I'm thinking, like, this doesn't make sense. And in short order, I start reading stuff. Okay, this isn't an angle.
No.
And but Owen, it's hard not to think of that incident. But we were in Germany, and you know how it is up there. Some of those guys just bitch. It makes it a slog.
Yeah, I saw him.
So I see Owen sitting down there, and he's just looking at the TV, and he's not selling anything. So I sit down next to him, and I say, Owen, how the fuck do you I try to pick his brain. He keeps looking at me and just shaking his head, not answering anything. I'm like an hour I'm down there talking to him, betting, right? And he finally looks at me and he goes, and the earplugs, and I didn't know it. He goes, "What'd you say?"
Wow.
Perfect Owen, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So the next day we were in the former East Germany, whatever the city is. And it's pretty sparse. Like you go over to that old side, at least back then, you could feel as soon as you left west into what was east, because you go from modern to like 1940.
Yes.
And all the color of the buildings, still holes in them and bullet holes and everything. Well, there was across this gigantic paved area behind the hotel, there was a tanning salon. So me and Brett, Owen, and there was a fourth person walked over. Well, they only had so many of each bed. So Brett got the top line, I think it was like 5 minutes or whatever. And by the time I get done, I come out and they tell me Owen's left. So I'm going out and I can see Owen walking up there with a crowd of people around him, and he says something that goes like this, and that crowd all comes rushing back to me. I don't know what he did. I knew he pulled something. I didn't know what he pulled. And here they come back, and I hear him saying, Brett, you know, baseball cap and stuff. I'm going, no, Shane, Brett. And I look up, and he's going like this, waving and laughing, right? That's how we got rid of the crowd, too. I was Bret Hart.
Right.
He would come to me and say stuff like, hey, can you watch my match tonight? Sure. So you go to, one night he's wrestling Davey Boy Smith, right? So he's flying mares, and you see him go like this with his hand. And Davey starts kicking again. Hand goes again, more kicking. This goes on like 5 or 6 times. What the hell's he? I can't see what he's doing, but he's rubbing his hand across his mouth. I see Davey selling hell of it. So Davey comes back, and he's got a beard of like mashed mushroom or bananas and dirt and like, it's all stuck to his face, right? and I said, hey, what we're doing? He said he had it in his tights. I said, well, so in your tights, you went to the ring with mashed bananas and coffee grounds.
And just to play.
Just to play, right? Another time with Davey Boy Smith, we were traveling together. Me and Dustin would always get him like a big pizza with like quadruple cheese and stuff. And he'd always, oh, you fat fuckers, I'm not going to eat it. I just get willpower, right? So we get all the way to the hotel room. He hadn't touched the pizza. So I throw it on the floor next to the door. We go down to the bar. I come back up and go to bed. He comes back up after. The light opens up and closes, and in the dark, I hear the box open, and he's eating out. So he goes, what the fuck? Shane Douglas, you fucking ripper, what the fuck? What's he? So I turn the light on, and I'm like, oh my God! He had a beard of ants.
No!
Like this.
Oh, the man.
And the whole pizza's like quivering. It's
wow.
He always accused me of ripper. I said, where the fuck would I hide 10 million ants?
Yeah, that's true. Hey, I'm going to tell you real quick about, we talked about the horse, now we talk about Germany.
Yeah.
Well, Stu and them sent Smith out over to Germany to learn to wrestle. Well, before we had the nylon trunks that we all had at the beginning, now they use spandex. They had wool tights when Stu wrestled.
Right.
So Smith would wrestle only on the Indian reservations in Calgary. And he would get guys down the side headlock, take them over, and he'd lay. Well, the elastic from his wool tights had worn out, and his balls was hanging out, and he'd be laying there like that, right? His balls hanging out, just hanging out. But when they sent him to Germany, Stu and them sent him over there, and first night, he walks out to the ring, he's got a Hitler mustache. And he walks out, and he's got a robe on, right? And he does a goose step. He opens up his robe, and hell, he ain't got nothing on under it. They send him back to Calgary.
Right back.
Then Stu sent him to Japan to learn with the Noki. He lasted there about a week or two. They sent him back, said we can't teach him. He's unteachable. I mean, just crazy. Could you imagine walking out with a Hitler? I mean, in Germany.
I can give you a comparison to that, but I was doing the Dean character.
Right.
The Dean character was supposed to have 7 PhDs, smartest man in the world, right? So they wanted me to do a promo every night as the Dean. So I'm thinking, Tony Greek, who I didn't get along with, kept coming, what do you got? What's your brother? I can't think, I'll think of something, right? So I'm walking to the ring, and I'm thinking, wait, this is Vienna, Austria, this is where Hitler was born. Right. So I get in the ring, I'm thinking, this is going to be a great promo, right? I said, Ich sprechen English, das ist besser. I'll speak English, this is better, right? Fucking them all off. And I said, the Dean has come to Vine for a reason. And the place, I said, I wanted to look into the eyes of the people that spawned Dale.
Oh, wow.
The place went, wow. You could have heard a fucking pin drop in the last row, right?
That's chilling him.
Yeah, oh, dude. And like, when I get back up, I got reamed out. I was like, I'm not going to do that anymore. So going out with the
the mustache,
brother.
the 9 yards, and doing the juice step.
Yeah.
And then he opens up his robe and he's standing there,
Yeah.
and the people are laughing.
Yeah.
And he acts like he don't know
Yeah.
that it's there. You know, the guys used to put toilet paper in their tights too. One night I was wrestling Dennis Foundry. He said, "Pull that toilet paper out of my tights." I said, "What?" He said, "Pull that toilet paper out of my tights." And I never really understood what he said, but hell, he had a whole row in there, and he wanted to pull it out like he had, some guys would do that.
Yeah.
They would go run into the rain, and they'd have toilet paper hanging out of their tights.
Yeah.
And people be laughing, and blah, 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 blah. Think about that today.
Yeah.
The mileage you get out of that.
Forever.
Everybody's like, your music plays, and finally you come run out the rain, there's a hill waving, all of a sudden you got toilet paper hanging out your tights like that.
The Jackie Gleason Bandit and the
Smokey and the Bandit,
Let's jump forward a little bit because I know we're getting tight on time here. So how long were you doing this wrestling with Curry and these guys before you get the phone call to go to Mid-South?
Well, here's what happened. I'll make it brief. I graduated high school. And when I did this, I had a small territory in Kentucky. And soon as I graduated high school, I went to that little territory. Mm-hmm. I wrestled there for a short time. Then I went to Nick Douglas. I went from Nick Douglas to Louisiana the first time. Buck Roberts, the booker, he said, "What's your name?" I said, "Bobby Fulton." He said, "No, it's not. It's Russ Jones." I said, "Russ Jones?" People would ask me my name in towns. I don't even want to tell you. I only lasted there a short time because I was broke when I went there anyway. Then, real quick, I went back to Kentucky. I got in a ride, got my arm broke. Went from there. I was in Calgary prior to that. It was about 2 or 3 years before I went back and got my break with Tommy Rogers and the Fantastic.
And how did that come about?
Well, me and Terry Taylor was the very first Fantastic ones in Georgia for a short time. Mm-hmm. So what happened was I was working in San Antonio and Luke Williamson gave me my first break. Bill Dundee had knew me and this and that. So they had the Rock and Roll Express real hot there. Jerry Jarrett wanted them to come back for 3 months or so to Memphis. So they needed a team to fill the gap. We were supposed to just be a 90-day team. Yeah. But we got over there and we started getting over. And then they said, "Where do you guys want to go after this? Eddie Graham wants you guys to go to Florida." I said, "Tommy." And they said, "Fritz Von Erb wants you to come to Dallas." I said, "Let's go to Dallas. It's a sort of move." So the 90-day team, we started getting over. I mean, the rock and roll it's like somebody wrote me the other day, a writer for NXT. He said, "I don't understand why you guys agree about being copycats of the rock and roll or whoever." And they said, they don't never say, "Well, here's the Rolling Stones, and here's the Beatles, and what about that group, the Rolling Stones?"
Yeah.
I mean, we're different things.
Right.
But long story short, we got over so strong in Dallas that even the Von Erichs knew it, even Fritz knew it, and this and that. So it just steamrolled, but we were a 30-day, we were a 90-day team that ended up sleeping, ended up getting over. And for some reason, being smaller guys, we clicked. I had stuff I offered the team, he had stuff I offered the team, ended up going all over and this and that, but it was just magical.
Right.
Shane, it was, you've been in a bunch of tag team situations. Yeah. I was only in one. But some of them click and some of them don't. Right. I mean, you got to be together.
Right, yeah.
You guys are traveling, shoulder to shoulder. Yep. And it's tough. I mean, me and Tommy Rogers got in fist fights plenty of times. Yeah. I mean, we'd be telling each other, "Yeah, man, I love my buddy Tommy." Boom, boom. I remember one time I was at I'd been in a lot of pain. So I took some Percodans. I was laying in my tailor bed in my house. Well, Tommy came and knocked at my door. And all of a sudden I opened up the door and I'm standing totally naked. Yeah. And I said, "What do you want?" He said, "Well, I got fined last week because I showed up late to the town." I said, "Uh-huh." I said, "Yeah." Because what had happened was on one day, you know how Bill was. Oh.
Yes.
One day I waited on Tommy. We were supposed to meet at 2:30. Tommy didn't show up till 3:15.
Yeah.
I said, Tommy said, I fell asleep in the doctor's office, man.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So the next day, I'm supposed to leave at 2:30. He's not there. I said, I gotta go, man.
Yeah.
So I drove on. So he said, I want you to pay my fine. I said, I'm not paying your fine. I'm a bunch of poker dance.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not paying your fine. Boom! He sucker punches me. Boom! Boom! Now me and him are fighting. I'm going from being on a bunch of poker dance,
Sure.
we're wrestling 9 times a week, 9 different cities. Boom! 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 I grab a hold of him. Me and him go. Boom! Down, tear my kitchen table down, busting furniture up. Finally, I said, "Hey, let me get my clothes on, right?" So we were in Mid-South, so all of a sudden, I go and put my clothes on, he leaves. I drive to town that night, Jackson, at the Fairgrounds building.
Mm-hmm.
And we're good, we're running, but we're doing good, we're talking. So I said, I told Jim Mantel, the butcher, I'm going to kill him when he walks through the damn door.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm killing him.
Yeah.
I was all messed up on the poker dance earlier, asleep in my tanning bed. And I said, I don't know, never want to team with him again.
Yeah.
They said, well, he's on the other side of the building. And man, we got to make this happen.
Yeah.
You guys are over, and we need to continue this. So we made amends. But quite a few times we got in fights
Sure.
like that, as I was going back saying. But in the long run, we knew that we loved the business, and we wanted to be successful.
Mm.
And it was our way of doing it.
Right.
I was always a baby, always before a heel. I'm a better heel than I was a baby face. But I knew as the Fantastics, that was my money.
Yeah.
That was my money.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I mean, there are things that come along in wrestling, and like I learned last week, 2 weeks ago, interviewing Tully, that something as famous, infamous, as world-renowned as the Four Horsemen are,
Right.
that was not an idea that somebody came up
Right.
with. It just sort of happened.
It happened.
And that was the first time I'd ever heard that story. And I thought,
Right.
it's crazy that there wasn't somebody saying, well, I'm going to put these guys together
Yeah.
and call them this.
Yeah.
A lot of times, like that chemistry you're talking about, you can see like the times where they put something that doesn't
Yeah,
work,
that's right.
doesn't work. Suddenly, something clicks here.
Yes.
And in doing that, you can see the magic of wrestling. To me, like Mid-South wrestling to me was, at that time, 86, 87. Getting older and having had an amateur wrestling background, I was quickly moving away from WWF.
Right.
Entertainment stuff.
Right.
And
And you didn't like that at the beginning either.
No,
When
no,
you
no.
seen Hardy Race,
Yes.
you liked Hardy Race.
Then I find this Thursday night UWF show.
Right.
And was like everything I thought wrestling should be.
Right.
So
And it was.
Yeah.
There was rules.
Yep.
If you remember right,
Yes.
you couldn't make a save in the tag match.
Yes.
If you did, it was a disqualification.
Yeah.
And I think no jumping off top rope.
Top rope stuff, yeah. No over the rope.
No over the rope.
Yeah.
Which this is basic stuff, and I think needs to be today because every football game I ever watched, an official officiates the game.
Yes, yeah.
And it's like I heard somebody say the other day, well, refs and officials don't do nothing.
Yeah.
I mean,
They're a prop.
but what I'm saying is, they're not used properly because they never disqualify nobody. Nothing's 100. Okay, 20 outside on the floor is the count. 109, 110,
Yeah.
111, 120. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
But with Bill Watts, there was definite rules,
It all had to make
and
sense.
it made it legitimate.
Yes. Yep.
And Bill Dundee always told me, don't try to make something logical and something illogical. But Bill Watts made it so that it was believable.
Yes.
And because of the rules,
Yeah.
added legitimacy to it.
Yes.
Every sport has rules.
Yeah. Well, my take on UWF is from here, looking back,
Right.
not as a kid coming up in it. I look back and thought of all the people I knew that had gone through UWF Mid-South,
Right.
and I've not been able to come up with a single name yet of anybody that was a star
Right.
there that wasn't great at the craft.
Right.
And they all went to make
Yes,
huge
yes,
money for
yes,
other
yes,
places.
yes,
And I
yes.
think a lot of that, as much as we talk about Bill's mannerisms, I look back at those days as incredibly formative to me.
Yeah.
Learning.
Yeah.
You know, I was learning my craft. Even didn't know it at the time.
No.
I was learning my craft.
No.
But it's, we got to get rushing here. But
Yeah, Shane, I'm going to tell you why you learned your craft. You ready?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. You learned your craft because you were wrestling guys that was better than you.
Much. Yeah.
You see, today the guys can't learn because they're not wrestling people that's better than them.
Right.
Most times.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, with that being said, the only way that they can learn, and because they're not wrestling 6-7 nights a week like we did, that was another thing that helped us learn.
Right.
Plus, we had guys that worked on top that would help us. So, if a guy's never drew no money, how can you show somebody how to do it?
Right. Right.
How can you tell somebody how to
Yeah.
do it? You know, it's like the psychology and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I asked Ricky Morton this a couple of weeks ago. I asked Tom Pritchard this. Now I'm going to ask you this. And we had the same answer, and I'll tell you what the answer is after. When were you in your prime? At what age for professional wrestling? I mean, listen, hitting on all cylinders.
Yeah.
You finally got it.
Right.
Your body was right.
Yeah.
You're talking. I mean, you had it. Your prime.
I'd say
Yeah.
6-7 years in.
How old was you?
28, 9, 7,
29.
like in that range.
Well, you know, when we said, I'm talking about your prime.
Yeah.
When you, and you're smarter than us, of course, being a Mensa member, so I'll say this. We all said 30. So you was right.
Well, I didn't master it at that point.
Well, that's what I'm asking
Yeah,
you. When did you master it?
Probably even later. Like I would say I was at my best in my career in ECW.
Okay, how old was you?
33, 4, 5.
Well, see, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But how old was you when you broke in?
I was, well, not including the backyard stuff, I was right after college, 18.
Okay,
Or
okay.
high school, right after high school.
Okay,
Into
okay,
college.
okay.
18,
So,
19.
we all said 30. We thought we was in our prime, where we really knew you said 33.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting question to ask
Sure.
people because when do you feel like you was in your prime, you're sitting on those cylinders, you learned, you've done your thing, you know what I'm saying?
For me, like, and Steve Austin had asked me this in his podcast, on the 2-hour conversation before the podcast, because we
Right.
hadn't spoken in so long.
Right.
And he said, I like to ask this question. He told me what it was, and he asked me then. He said, how long before you started feeling comfortable? I said, I started thinking back, and I thought, well, up till about 6, maybe 7 years in, if something went wrong in that match, my hair would go on fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
No clue how to fix
right,
it.
Right.
At that point, the light bulb went on. I could calm down, grab a hold, fix it, but I hadn't even close to mastering it yet.
Right.
I would say that came for me about 11 years in when I was working at
11,
ECW, where
okay,
all the things
yes,
like made sense
yes.
to me. And I still learn stuff today.
Oh, we all do.
Yeah.
We all do. And you know, part of it is we forget.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all of a sudden we sit and go, oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many intricate parts to this business
Right. Yes.
that people don't understand.
No.
It's just like I was teaching the guys in there earlier about just the little things. You see, I say this. It's the little thing that people pay attention to. I say this, and all the people watching this. I say, do you know when there's a good match or not? And they said, yes. I said, then people know, I know. Do you know when there's a good wrestler in the ring or not? Yes. I said, then people know it too.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about moving,
Yeah.
stance. They can just tell.
Yeah.
There's something different about you.
Yeah.
Something different about me. Something different about them that takes us out of the independent. You understand? Like, man, they've been there.
Yeah. This kid has something.
They move.
Yeah.
Yes, they have it. They have the not just the it factor, but the idea that the fans say, man, that guy's great.
Yeah.
I've seen the rest of the stuff tonight, but man, it was just something special.
Sure. I looking back, I didn't see it at the time. Too young and dumb to see it. When they first put me there, they put me with Pez Watley for a couple months. Then Black Bart, Dick Murdoch, Dick Snyder.
Right.
And again, at that time, it's just another opponent. But looking back, it was here.
But
It was slow climbing you.
they did the same thing to me when I was in Memphis. Miss Christine Jarrett liked me for some reason. Bill Dundee did and Jerry Jarrett. And they put me with Gypsy Joe and Frank Morrell the Angel. I don't know if you know them guys or not.
Yes.
And that was really my schooling. Every night I'd work 20-minute matches.
Yeah.
And I would have matches with them. And I was really learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even Tojo Thumb and different people. But like you said, we don't realize it at the time. But they're really grooming you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Take you to this level.
Sure.
Take you to this level. Because it behooves the promoter, if you learn and get over, that you might draw him money.
Right.
I'll tell you this. I'll never forget when I left Memphis. I'd been working underneath for a long time, before the Fantastics. I drove to San Antonio to start. Bill Dundee had told Luke Williams and said, "Do you have a spot for Bobby Fulton? He's just floundering here." I'd put Killer Carl Trupp over, and as I was walking back, Tommy Marlin, Eddie Marlin's brother, said, "Bobby, it's time for you to go." I was trained, I was looking good, you know. Well, I walked into the San Antonio office, told his dad.
Told his dad, Joe, yeah.
And all of a sudden, he had been working out in the little gym he had there. He was pouring down sweat, he said. And he'd been in a car wreck, so he barely walked. You met him before,
Yes.
right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He said, "Listen, Bobby, when a promoter sees somebody, meets a wrestler for the first time, he either sees little money, no money, or big money." Now keep in mind, this is about 1982, right? And I wrestled the first match that night, and Joe paid every night. I wrestled the first match, I got $400
Damn.
for the first match.
Yeah.
And that told me that Joe Blanchard must have seen something in me.
Sure. Yeah.
And they started pushing me. They would give me an opportunity with Adrian Street, with different people and stuff like that. But like you said, you learn, and then they have to groom you and help you along.
Right.
Just like Joe Blanchard or anybody else.
Yeah.
Very appreciative of it.
Yeah.
You know.
I always ask you, we'll wrap up with this, is when they're telling me a year in the business, whatever, I'll say, a lot of shit to learn, isn't there?
Yeah.
Without fail,
Yeah.
I was a good high school athlete. I wrestled amateur.
Right.
I felt literally like a turtle on my back. I
That's
knew
what
I
you
didn't
did.
know any of this stuff.
Right.
And luckily, Dominic had taught us keep our mouths shut. And so I would sit there and watch. What's Hardy take out of his bag first?
Right.
What's he put on first?
Right.
What's he take off?
Right.
How's he put them away?
Right.
I'm watching all of this because I don't know any of this stuff.
Oh, I know.
All of it, the basics. But I'll be a million stuff more. First of all, I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you so
a lot
much.
of great fans here.
Shane, I appreciate it.
Known for a long, long time.
Yes, you too. Lots of respect for you, as you know.
Ditto, same. Anybody makes it in this
matches.
business, right? It's
Yeah. And still be alive.
yeah.
At
Still
our age.
kicking, still kicking today because
Yeah.
we don't usually make this age, but definitely want to have you back because we
I
just
love
scratched the
it.
surface
Yes,
here.
we did.
I
I enjoyed it.
Appreciate you being here, everybody. Fantastic,
Thanks.
Bobby Fulton.